Senator Kelly, thank you for coming on Deseret Voices.
Good to be on, McKay.
We are speaking the day before you are scheduled to hold an event with Republican Senator John Curtis of Utah at Utah Valley University, which is, of course, where Charlie Kirk was assassinated in September. I wanted to start this conversation by asking you what was going through your mind when you first heard that Charlie Kirk had been shot, because obviously your wife, former Congresswoman Gabby Giffords, was the victim of an assassination attempt. You are more acquainted than most with the realities of political violence.
Much like what happened with my wife, Gabby, my initial reaction was that, well, I imagine he'll probably be okay. My initial reaction to her shooting in 2011, when her chief of staff called me and just very simply said, "Hey, I don't know how to tell you this, but Gabby's been shot." I was like, well, she's probably been shot in the arm. And then she told me that she'd been shot in the head. And, at that point, I realized that both of our lives have been, changed forever. That day came, just kind of rushing back to me when one of my staff members showed me the video. At first, he says, "I don't know if I should show you this because it doesn't look real." And then when I saw that video, my initial reaction was, well, if it is real, he's not going to survive. That moment is when I just immediately thought back to what happened with Gabby. And, it's just one more time in our country's history. One of these things, I think there were other things, but just makes us stand out in the worst of ways.
To me, as somebody who has just been covering politics for a long time, it felt like a kind of blinking red warning light for the kind of health of our democracy, right? It feels like we are, and I think actually statistics do bear this out, in a moment where political violence is increasing. I'm curious what you think is driving it. Why are we in this moment where people seem to feel like the answer to our political problems and disagreements and dysfunction is to take up arms and try to murder people?
Well, I think people are feeling desperate in a lot of different ways. It might be social change. It might be economic inequality. The wealthier folks in our country just keep getting richer. And then overlaid on top of that is social media and the ability to put a message out into the world in a rather anonymous way, and where you can say things to a very large group of people that you would never say to them publicly, like if you were standing in front of them. And it just further takes us down a road where we become more divided. And I think people think this is them against us.
Yeah.
And we're somehow marching towards, some kind of civil war. I don't believe that. Mm-hmm. I think we've got to figure out ways to turn down the temperature here. It's up to us, people like myself and others, in leadership positions to, help the country move forward. I think it's also fair to say that we have a president who looks for every opportunity to divide us. He's got the exact opposite instinct of every other president we've had in my lifetime. And I think it's probably fair to say every other president this country's ever had. I mean, can anybody think of one time that when something major has happened in our country that Donald Trump became the unifier? I can't.
I do feel like there's there's kind of a frog in the boiling water thing going on with our political culture, where we're now like a decade into the Trump era, and I think a lot of us have become desensitized.
Well, think about the young people.
Right.
I mean, there are folks that are starting to vote, and really, basically, all they ever remember as presidents is Donald Trump and Joe Biden.
Yeah. No, of course. And people don't remember a period before we had national leaders who were constantly, dehumanizing those that they disagreed with, vilifying them in every way imaginable. Not to say that there was some kind of perfect utopian period of politics where everybody was nice to each other, but it does feel like even in my adulthood, I've seen this kind of pretty dramatic shift in our political culture, and I think a lot of people have gotten used to it and kind of stopped realizing how different things are now than they were not that long ago.
I think saying dramatic shift is an understatement. I mean, it is like the continents, moving here.
Okay.
I mean, just think about this.
Yeah.
Think about this for a second. At a memorial service for Charlie Kirk, Erica Kirk says she forgives the shooter. And Donald Trump follows that up with, "I hate my political enemies."
I want to return to President Trump in a second, but before we move off this point, I'm curious from your vantage point on Capitol Hill, talking to your colleagues, talking to other elected officials, not just in the Senate, but around the country, to what extent are they afraid of political violence targeting them? I have spoken to people who are in high elected office who don't want to say this publicly, but will acknowledge privately or anonymously, that they are now thinking much more than they ever thought they would have to think about their personal safety, the safety of their families, that they are walking around with this kind of knowledge that somebody could try to kill them at any given moment, which I think was not the case 20, 30 years ago. But I'm curious if you are seeing that same thing.
Yeah, we talk about it. And the death threats to members of Congress are up dramatically. From what I've learned, being the spouse of Gabby, and after she was shot, just my discussions with the Secret Service and the FBI, you learn that there's not a lot you can do. And it's usually not the person that makes a threat. We always focus on these people who make the threat. Charlie Kirk's shooter didn't threaten him. My wife Gabby's shooter never threatened her. So folks are really, really concerned about it. We're trying to do some things to make us a little bit safer.
But this is a situation where you when you think about what would actually have to change from like a logistical and security standpoint to really ensure everybody's safety, it's not really a scenario anybody should want, right? Like Charlie Kirk was killed on a college campus debating political ideas with other students. You don't really want a situation where those events like that are heavily guarded and you have to go through metal detectors to get to a political discussion on a college campus. Same with Capitol Hill. I mean, I think a lot of people who come to Washington for the first time are actually surprised by how accessible their congressmen and senators are, right? You go through a metal detector to get into the office buildings, but then you can just walk right up to an office. And I actually think that's a beautiful thing about American democracy, but we don't want to forfeit that because we can't figure out how to keep people with guns or, people who want to harm elected officials away from them, right?
We don't need to live in that kind of world. And we don't want to discourage people from serving an elected office because they're afraid of being harmed. That's not a good environment. I would say that, in my view, the number one thing that could happen right now to reduce the amount and the threat of political violence would be for the president to say, hey, we're all Americans. We are all in this together. We've got differences of opinion, but Democrats are not my enemy and the Republicans are not the enemy of the Democrats. That is definitely true here on Capitol Hill, where I've got great relationships with my Republican colleagues. We don't agree on everything. And we often have to verbally fight it out on the floor over policy. But to have somebody who is leading this country to, focus on that as a mission, to bring us together and unite us and talk about, values and what has created this great cohesive country, that would be huge. Now, I don't hold my breath. I'm I don't think it's going to happen.
Well, so President Trump might not say that, and I think given the evidence we have and the record we have, it's probably unlikely. But it does seem like the case that most elected officials in both parties, the vast majority, really do want to figure out how to solve this problem for the sake of the country and, if nothing else, for their own personal safety, right? This is where your event at UVU comes in. You and Senator Curtis disagree on a lot, right? You belong to different parties. You decided to hold this event together. Talk a little about what you hope to accomplish with this event and why you're doing it.
I'm a Democrat, he's a Republican, and we have differences of opinion. And sometimes, those differences could be pretty significant on policy, but we're friends, and I enjoy serving with him. The relationships between senators are not what people think they are. Let me give you an example. It's somebody who's pretty sophisticated person who I was talking to about, Washington, who is engaged very politically, who said to me, "Hey, do you ever see Ted Cruz when you're in D.C.?" And I said, "Yeah, I see him basically every week."
Right.
And then she said, "Do you ever talk to Ted Cruz?" "You don't talk to him, do you?" And I said, "Yeah, I pretty much talk to him, like, maybe not every day, but every week. I'm friends with Ted Cruz." And they found this almost unbelievable.
Yeah.
That a Democrat in the United States Senate could be friendly with a Republican colleague. And I've told Ted Cruz this story. And I'm like, "Ted, we got to figure out a way to, not him specifically, but just in general to show that we work together. We can disagree, but we do get along, and we have respectful relationships." I mean, across the board. I mean, I'm talking about all 100 of us. Now, you might have specific people you're not besties with, right? But we have strong relationships. And I think if the American people saw that a little bit more and understood that, I think that would also have a rather positive effect. So
no
coming
question.
back to John and I doing this at UVU, that's part of the goal here.
No, I mean, I just think that conversation you just described is emblematic of why the political incentives flow the other way, right? Like there are not as many political incentives to senators showing their constituents, especially the constituents in their base, their political base, that they are friendly with, quote unquote, the enemy, right? People would be astonished by it. Also, probably some people would be offended by it.
Yeah, well, because people view them as the enemy, but I don't.
Yeah, right.
They're the
right.
opposition.
And this is what has to change. We have to start thinking about people who disagree with us, even in very profound ways about very important issues, as the political opposition, not political enemies. How do you fix this? I mean, how do you show Americans that as high stakes as these issues are, they are not existential. They don't have to permanently divide us, and they certainly don't have to lead to civil war.
Yeah, how do you show them? Not many people watch C-SPAN, so they're not focused in on the floor of the United States Senate at 10 o'clock at night on a Friday, right? When we might be in there.
I am, but I understand that's not normal. Yeah.
Yeah, not many. It's tens of people
right.
are watching C-SPAN too, the floor of the U.S. Senate. So how do we do it? We do events like this, and we go on TV together. I've done that, a number of times with my Republican colleagues, and we try to say nice things about them, and we try to be respectful. And you can disagree. We're going to win some political fights, and we're going to lose some. But you don't have to go after people's character. And you don't have to refer to them as, enemies and call them awful names, and because people see that and they model that behavior.
The thing that always frightens me about political violence, aside from the obvious, is that everyone who studies this issue will tell you that political violence begets more political violence, right? There's that famous quote from Martin Luther King: "Returning violence for violence multiplies violence, adding deeper darkness to a night already devoid of stars," right? And I've been thinking about that a lot in recent months because we've been talking about political violence of a certain kind, but we are also in a moment where the imagery of violence, the threat of violence kind of looms in our politics. And just one example I'll give is, President Trump earlier this year, pretty controversially, began deploying troops to American cities to impose public order, to crack down on crime, he says. We have also seen ICE raids targeting undocumented immigrants. Various confrontations, often violent, have gone viral on social media. What do you make of this moment and how President Trump is using troops, the National Guard, to address these domestic issues like crime?
Well, I'd say it's not helpful. I get it. I'm the son of two cops. We want safe communities. We want safe streets. But to use the United States Army and the National Guard, in this role just sends a message about the purpose of the military. In Donald Trump's first term, he asked if the National Guard could shoot people that were protesting. Can we just shoot them in the legs? People remember that. And now they see these troops deployed in their communities, whether it's here in Washington or Chicago or Los Angeles. And they are wondering, what's next? I always question what's his motivation? I mean, is it really about crime and safer communities? Or is he trying to send a message that he has this political tool that he is willing to use against the American people?
Do you think that there's been a lot made of this idea that there's been less activism, fewer protests, fewer demonstrations in the street in Trump's second term compared to his first term? Are you saying that you think that the presence of the National Guard and the kind of imagery that's been invoked is part of the reason there haven't been as many anti-Trump demonstrations in the second term?
Well, I haven't seen that statistic, so I'll take your word for it that is accurate. Yeah, I think it could be. Or maybe folks are just exhausted and just are starting to check out. And that's probably the worst thing that could happen. It's for people to check out politically and say, hey, I'm just tired of all this. Our political world we're living in, it's just tiring people out. And my worry is they check out and then maybe they don't vote. They don't get involved. They're afraid to go to a peaceful protest because they're afraid it's going to turn into something else. So I am concerned about the chilling effect that these deployments will have on the American people.
There are some who believe Democrats allowed for too much public disorder and crime to spread, setting aside questions about enforcement of the border, et cetera, and that as a result, political space was created for Trump to come in and be the strong man. What do you think of that line of criticism? Do you think there's any validity to that?
I think that's fair. I mean, people don't like crime. My wife was the subject of a horrendous crime. I mean, and they shouldn't have to tolerate it. And I could tell you, it's not helping law enforcement to have the president, instructing ICE agents, which is also law enforcement, to be chasing people down because of the color of their skin and have them out on the streets masked so nobody knows who they are and not showing ID and not any idea who these people are. I mean, what are right. Folks in the community supposed to do when a guy with no identification and a mask come to chase them down? What would anybody do? So that's not giving the American people tremendous confidence in police in general.
I actually had a colleague at The Atlantic who just wrote a piece about this question of ICE agents wearing masks. And, his reporting suggested that they know it's a bad look. They know that it reduces public trust. And they're continuing to wear it for a variety of reasons. But one of them is that they fear for their own safety. You know, all of these interactions are being recorded by people with phones. They're worried that if an interaction that looks bad goes viral, that they could, receive their own death threats. What do you say to ICE agents who say, look, I have to worry about my own safety as I'm carrying out the orders that I've been given?
Don't have bad interactions with people. Do the job in a respectful way and follow the law. By the way, you don't have to follow unlawful orders. That's true for the military. I think it's true for federal law enforcement too. Nobody can tell you to break the law. You can't be told to violate people's constitutional rights. People have to stand up and say, no, I'm not going to do that. And
would you like to see more of that among ICE agents?
Yeah, of course I would. I'd like to see them wearing an ID, not wearing masks, and telling, Stephen Miller or Kristi Noem that we will follow the law and there are limits to what we will do. And we're not violating people's constitutional rights. I mean, there's evidence that they deported American citizens and they're breaking up communities. It benefits our country in no way. Tearing communities apart, taking parents away from their children. I mean, I've got two folks that I visited in an ICE facility in Florence, basically ICE jail. One of them, her name's Kelly Yu. She came to the United States from China 20 years ago. Today, her mother's a U.S. citizen, her daughter's a U.S. citizen, her sister's a U.S. citizen, her husband's a U.S. citizen. She's the only one who is not. She's been here 20 years. She has 2 or 3 businesses. She has 70 employees. She has added to our economy, added to that community in such a positive way. She's not only putting food on her family's table, she's putting food on other people's table. She's no threat to society at all. She's been sitting in a jail in Florence, Arizona for months. Now she has a deportation order. They're going to kick her out of the country and send her back to China. For what? Doesn't make us a better country. And here's the sad thing about this. I've got Republican colleagues that feel mostly the same as I do about this issue, many of them. They don't think we should be deporting 10 or 20 million people. They know that that does not benefit us as a nation. Sure, we need strong border security. We should be kicking out criminals and gang members and drug dealers. 100% we should be kicking them out. But didn't Donald Trump run on that? I guess it's fair to say he also said the mass deportation thing. I don't think anybody believed him.
Well, I think that one of the reasons, frankly, for the reported frustration that President Trump and some of his more hawkish advisors have been feeling is that they envisioned millions and millions of deportations, right? But the way he talked about it, to your point, was always that he would target violent criminals, dangerous, undocumented immigrants. And the reality is
there aren't millions of those.
there just aren't millions of them.
Yeah.
And I think that, anybody who has spent time in immigrant communities, I served a Latter-day Saint mission in Texas among Spanish-speaking immigrants, can tell you that while, of course, there are some, bad apples, the vast majority are like people you were just describing.
Yeah.
This, though, again, and I'm going to press you on this a little bit, is an issue where one could argue that Democratic policy failures opened the door to the mass deportations and the ICE raids, because it just is the case that the southern border, by most objective measurements, got fairly out of control during
you don't have to push me on this. I agree with you. I mean, Joe Biden's policy at the border was not working. It was a crisis. I said that from the first time I got elected, and worked really hard with this and pushed back against the administration and the White House multiple times. You got to do more. Need more Border Patrol agents. By the way, we need to close some of these gaps in border wall I mean, I'm probably the only Democrat that was able to get the White House to build some more border wall.
Can I ask you about that though? Because when you said you were pushing the Biden administration, I know you were. I mean, it's a matter of record that you disagreed with the President Biden's policy. What would you hear in response when you were talking to people in the Biden White House, when you were talking to the people advocating for or defending the Biden the border policy? I mean, what would they say to you when you said we need to take care of this? It's getting out of hand.
Well, you would hear a lot of, yeah, we're working on it. We're doing more. Thanks for calling. Yeah, we'll look into that. But I would say as, weak that the southern border policy that the previous president had, I would say that what this president is doing internally in our country is just awful and uncalled for and not helpful.
I want to ask you about one more recent development in the news that I think you'll have a unique perspective on. It was just reported that the USS General R. Ford, the world's largest aircraft carrier, has arrived in waters near Latin America. Thousands of U.S. troops are now closer to Venezuela, most likely escalating the conflict between Venezuela and the U.S. Trump administration obviously has targeted multiple boats that he says are drug boats, ordered military strikes on them. As a Navy veteran yourself, what do you think of this policy? This connects to this idea that Trump, being the strong man, telling American voters that he's going to crack down on these issues that have wide support, but in ways that are more provocative and controversial than past presidents. What do you make of what he's doing? Is it right? And what should change from your perspective, if anything?
Well, I mean, just go back to January, and was war with Venezuela on anybody's bingo card for this administration? Not mine. I mean, I did not see this coming. I mean, actually, kinetic strikes into Venezuela, which is what he's talking about now. Hey, nobody wants drug dealers. Nobody wants drugs coming into our country, whether it's fentanyl or cocaine or whatever it is. But is this the way to do it? And this, to me, is a law enforcement action. And I really worry about these young military pilots, MQ-9 drone operators, that it might be determined sometime later that what they were doing was not lawful. You see what happened with what the United Kingdom said? That they are no longer going to share all their intelligence with us. The Five Eyes countries, right? US, UK, Canada, Australia, New Zealand. We share everything across all of our intelligence agencies with theirs. This is a policy change from the UK at the highest level, and this is specifically because of the strikes against the Venezuelan boats. When you have one of our closest allies taking that kind of action against us because of what we're doing, and their words, not mine, that this might be against international law, we have a problem. He at times gets extra aggressive, and it's to our detriment. And sticking the Ford Battle Group out there. Now, I'm going to be really concerned when you see the Marine Expeditionary Force show up. That's when we really got to start to be concerned. By the way, fentanyl, most of it comes through on the Pacific. Now, they've done some strikes on the Pacific.
It doesn't come from Venezuela.
But it actually comes through the border.
Yeah.
The land border. That's where the focus should be if you want to bring down the amount of fentanyl into the United States.
Legal ports of entry is actually where we're seeing a lot of the fentanyl smuggled into the U.S.
I have seen it. I represent a border state. I spent a lot of time down there. We put in legislation the ability for them to get more technology, at the southern border to combat that fentanyl smuggling and other tools to prevent fentanyl from coming into the United States. President could do a lot more on that front.
I want to bring this conversation back to where we started as we wrap up here. You talked at the beginning about the need for us to turn down the temperature as a country, to pull back from the brink, de-escalate. But at the same time, you're not pulling your punches, right? When you talk about President Trump, you're very critical of his policies. You're very critical of him. I'm wondering if you can talk about how you reconcile the desire to de-escalate the tension in our political culture with what you seem to believe is a need to also be very clear-eyed and direct about the points of disagreement. Are there kind of principles that you follow in talking about these issues where you feel like you can be constructive and still support a healthy democratic culture without biting your tongue and hiding your opinions? Because I bet a lot of people listening to our conversation will have that same thought that, like, yeah, it sounds nice for us to all get along, but we disagree really profoundly about really important things, and I don't want to just shut up about it.
Yeah, well,
right?
here's the thing, though. You probably also noticed that I never called the president a name, right? I never said he was my enemy. I want to work with the president on anything that helps this country, do better. We are so fortunate to live in the greatest country that this planet has ever seen. We're generous, we're innovative, we're welcoming. We don't always get it right, and I think this president largely gets most of it wrong. Not everything, but a lot of it. But I don't consider him my enemy at all. I consider him, he's a member of the opposition party. I think he makes bad decisions, but he called us all dogs the other day, and I would never say anything like that about him.
Senator Kelly, thank you for making the time. Thank you for coming on Deseret Voices, and I hope we can talk again soon.
Look forward to it.